These videos are based on real events, experiences, and accounts. However, all names, locations, and identifying details have been deliberately changed to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. Viewer discretion is advised. I've worked as a canine officer for almost a decade now. My partner is a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois named Atlas. If you've ever worked with working dogs, you know their personalities can vary wildly. Some are jumpy, some are stubborn. Atlas isn't either of those things. He's steady. I've taken him through abandoned factories in the middle of the night, dense woods during manhunts, and drug searches inside warehouses where the noise alone would rattle most animals. Atlas has never hesitated. Once he gets the command, he moves forward like it's just another job. That's why the call I'm about to talk about has never left my head, because it's the only time in my career I've seen that dog refuse to go somewhere. It happened about 2 years ago when I was working patrol in a small town outside of Dayton, Ohio. Nothing about the night stood out at first. It was quiet, one of those slow shifts where the radio stays mostly silent and you spend most of the time driving in circles hoping something actually happens. Around 11:30 p.m., a call came over the radio about a foot pursuit. Patrol officers had tried to stop a man a few blocks away for suspicious behavior. Instead of cooperating, the guy bolted. He ran through several backyards, hopped fences, and disappeared somewhere in a residential neighborhood. When officers reached the end of the last yard he'd crossed, they noticed something odd. A side gate leading into another property was wide open, and the back door of the house on that property was unlocked. Neighbors nearby said they heard shouting and what sounded like a struggle in the yard moments before the suspect disappeared. At that point, patrol called for canine. Atlas and I were only about 10 minutes away. When we arrived, 2 cruisers were parked along the curb under a flickering streetlight. The house itself sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was a typical 2-story suburban place. White siding, small front porch, and a narrow backyard surrounded by tall wooden fencing. The officers on scene filled me in quickly. They had already done a quick sweep of the first floor, but didn't feel comfortable clearing the house completely. Since the back door was open and the suspect vanished right near the property, they believed there was a good chance he had forced his way inside and was hiding somewhere. The homeowners were apparently out of town. I clipped Atlas onto his short lead and gave him the search command. Immediately, his nose dropped toward the ground. He pulled me toward the backyard first. The gate was hanging open slightly, rocking in the wind. Atlas sniffed around the dirt path leading up to the back door and then moved inside the house without hesitation. The first floor was quiet. Atlas checked the living room first. His nose swept across the carpet, along the couch, and around the coffee table. Nothing. Then we moved into the kitchen next. Same result. Then the laundry room. Still nothing. If the suspect was inside, he wasn't on the first floor. At the far end of the hallway was a staircase leading upstairs. Atlas pulled toward it immediately. I followed. The second floor was much narrower than the first. A long hallway ran straight ahead with 3 bedrooms and a small bathroom branching off from it. The air upstairs felt stale, like the windows hadn't been opened in weeks. Atlas moved past the first bedroom and checked inside quickly. Empty. The second bedroom was the same. Then he pulled toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. I stepped inside with him and shined my flashlight around. Everything looked normal. The sink was clean, towels were neatly folded beside the bathtub, no signs of anyone hiding in the shower or behind the door. Atlas sniffed along the base of the vanity. Then suddenly, he stopped. His body stiffened, his ears pushed forward, and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. That alone caught my attention. Atlas almost never growled during searches unless he had a clear reason to. Then he turned toward the bathroom doorway. The growl became louder. A second later, he started barking. Sharp, aggressive barks aimed straight out into the hallway. I stepped backward beside him and aimed my flashlight out the door. "What is it?" I muttered quietly. Atlas wasn't looking at me. He was locked onto something farther down the hall. I followed his gaze. At the very end of the hallway, near the last bedroom door, someone was standing there. The figure was tall and completely still, just a dark silhouette against the dim light coming from a window behind them. At first, I assumed it had to be one of the officers who had followed us upstairs, but none of them had announced themselves, and they knew better to approach a canine search quietly. I called out, "Police canine, identify yourself." No answer. Atlas barked harder. The figure didn't move. Something about the way they stood felt wrong. Too still. Too calm. I tried again. "Who's there?" Still nothing. Then, Atlas did something I had never seen before. Instead of pulling forward toward the person, he stepped backward. He pressed against my leg and kept barking, refusing to move down the hallway. That alone made my pulse spike. Atlas had tracked armed suspects through dark woods without hesitation, but now he was backing away. The figure finally moved. Slowly. They turned toward the bedroom at the end of the hall. Then they walked inside. Just like that. No rush, no panic. Just a calm step through the doorway. I immediately grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Canine Unit. I may have visual on the suspect upstairs in the rear bedroom." The officers downstairs responded that they were heading up. I started down the hallway. Atlas resisted immediately. He planted his paws against the floor and tried pulling backward. "Come on," I told him, but he didn't budge. I had to physically guide him forward. Even then, he kept looking up at me with a confused expression, like he didn't understand why we were moving toward that room. When we finally reached the bedroom doorway, Atlas stopped completely. He refused to cross the threshold. Not even one step. I drew my weapon and stepped inside alone. The room was empty. Completely empty. Just a bed against a wall and a dresser across from it. The closet door stood open. Nothing inside. The window was closed. No balcony. No escape. Yet the person I saw had clearly walked into that room only seconds earlier. Behind me in the hallway, Atlas continued growling. And no matter how much I encouraged him, he would not enter that room. Not then. Not ever. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a few seconds, letting my eyes adjust while my flashlight swept across the walls again. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. The room was small and almost completely bare. A single bed sat against the far wall with a gray comforter pulled halfway off the mattress. Across from it stood a short wooden dresser with nothing on top except a dusty lamp. The closet door hung open beside it. Empty. No movement. No sound. Behind me in the hallway, Atlas kept growling. It wasn't the aggressive bark he used when confronting suspects. This sound was lower, deeper, almost like a warning. Every few seconds, he'd glance down the hall and then back toward the bedroom as if he couldn't decide which direction worried him more. Footsteps came rushing up the stairs behind us. 2 patrol officers rounded the corner into the hallway with their flashlights up. "You got him?" one of them asked. I stepped aside slightly so they could see the room. "He walked right in here," I said. Both of them looked around quickly. "Where?" the other officer asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." They entered the bedroom cautiously, checking the closet and looking behind the dresser even though there wasn't enough space for anyone to fit. Nothing. One of the officers crouched and looked under the bed. "Clear." I turned back toward Atlas. He was still standing in the hallway, rigid as a statue. His paws were planted firmly against the carpet like he had no intention of moving forward. "Atlas, here." Normally, that command would bring him straight to my side. This time, he didn't move. One of the officers walked over and tried coaxing him in. "Come on, boy." Atlas backed away slightly and kept his eyes fixed on the bedroom doorway. "That's weird," the officer muttered. "You have no idea," I replied. We searched the room again, slower this time. Closet walls, under the mattress, behind the dresser drawers. The window was the biggest mystery. It was shut tight. even if someone had managed to open it quietly, the drop to the backyard below was about 15 feet onto hard ground. We would have heard it, but the window frame didn't even look disturbed. One of the officers leaned outside slightly with his flashlight. No ladder, no marks, nothing. I stepped back into the hallway where Atlas was standing. He immediately moved closer to me, but still refused to face the bedroom directly. Instead, he looked down the hallway toward the stairs, almost like he wanted to leave. That feeling I had earlier returned. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. The suspect couldn't have disappeared into thin air, yet every piece of evidence in front of us suggested exactly that. "Let's clear the house again," I said. We went through every room on the second floor once more. The bathroom, the 2 bedrooms we had already checked. Everything was empty. Downstairs wasn't any different. The kitchen, living room, laundry room, nothing. Even the backyard and surrounding fences were searched with flashlights. Still nothing. The suspect had simply vanished. About 20 minutes later, the officers started discussing the possibility that the man we saw might have slipped past us somehow and escaped through the yard before we arrived upstairs. But I knew that wasn't possible, because I saw him, clear as day, standing at the end of that hallway. Eventually, the search was called off. There was no longer any sign that the suspect was even on the property. I led Atlas back outside toward the cruiser. The moment we stepped into the cool night air, I felt the tension leave his body slightly. His tail relaxed and the growling finally stopped. When I opened the back door of the canine unit, he climbed inside and curled into his crate almost immediately. That alone was strange. Normally, after a search, he'd sit upright, watching everything around him, waiting for the next command. Tonight, he just laid down, and he avoided eye contact. I leaned against the side of the cruiser for a minute while the other officers finished their paperwork. One of them walked over. "Your dog's never acted like that before." "Not once," I said. "He might have smelled something we couldn't." "Maybe." But the truth was, Atlas had smelled plenty of suspects before, and he had never backed away from one. Before leaving, I walked back toward the house one last time. The upstairs lights were still on. From outside, you could see the window of that last bedroom at the end of the hall. I stood there staring at it longer than I probably should have, trying to convince myself I had simply misjudged what I saw. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. When I finally got back into the cruiser, Atlas lifted his head slightly and looked toward the house. Not at the yard, not at the officers, at that upstairs window. His ears pressed back slightly. Then he slowly laid his head down again. The suspect from that night was never located. Not in the neighborhood, not anywhere else in the city. Weeks passed. The case eventually faded into the background like most things do in police work. But one detail kept bothering me. About a month later, I happened to run into one of the officers who had been there that night. We started talking about the call again. That's when he mentioned something I hadn't known before. After we left, detectives spoke with the homeowners. Apparently, the room at the end of the hallway had always made them uncomfortable. The previous owners had complained about the same thing. According to them, people would occasionally think they saw someone standing in the hallway late at night, right outside that bedroom, watching. Of course, detectives dismissed it as nerves or imagination, but hearing that made my stomach twist, because that's the exact spot where I saw the figure standing. The officer told me one more thing before we went our separate ways. When detectives asked the homeowners about it, he said, they told them their dog used to do the same thing. I frowned. What do you mean? He wouldn't go near that bedroom. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then he shrugged. Animals pick up on things we don't. Maybe he's right. All I know is that Atlas has tracked armed fugitives through dark forests and abandoned buildings without hesitation. But that night, in that quiet suburban house, he refused to take one step into that room. And I trust that dog more than I trust my own instincts. The rain had been relentless all evening. soaking the streets and washing the city in a dull gray haze. I'd been on patrol for nearly 8 years, mostly night shifts, so the gloom didn't bother me much. But there was a tension in the air that night I couldn't shake, a heavy, oppressive feeling that made every shadow in the street seem alive. I was parked near a small intersection, my cruiser's headlights cutting through the rain-soaked darkness when the radio crackled. Unit 47, we have a 911 hang-up. Caller stated they were being held inside a home on Maple Street. Male voice possibly altered to sound like a child. Proceed with caution. My stomach tightened. A voice altered to sound like a child wasn't something you ignored. I responded immediately, letting dispatch know I was en route. The address was only 10 minutes away, but by the time I arrived, the storm had worsened. Rain streaked across my windshield, and all the street lamps along the block were out. Darkness swallowed the neighborhood, and the few houses with lights on seemed almost eerie in contrast. Chris, a newer officer, was already there. His cruiser sat idling at the curb. He gave me a nod as I pulled up. "Looks like a fixer-upper," he said quietly, squinting at the house ahead. I followed his gaze. The house was older, 2 stories, with chipped siding and broken shingles. Grass had grown over the walkway, and the porch sagged slightly, giving the whole place an abandoned look. But the door was cracked open just enough to suggest someone was inside. "Take the lead," I said. Chris nodded and fell back slightly, flashlight raised. His job was backup, watch my back, cover my 6. I didn't mind. I stepped onto the porch, the wet wood groaning under my boots. The smell hit me instantly, a mix of mildew, decay, and something metallic underneath. I announced myself loudly. "Police department, if anyone's inside, make your presence known." No answer, just the sound of the rain against the roof. I pushed the door open a little further and stepped inside. The living room was messy, but nothing too unusual for a house that looked neglected. Dust-covered furniture, stacks of old magazines, and a few broken chairs. A flickering overhead light struggled against the shadows, revealing more clutter than I'd first noticed. I called out again. Still nothing. Moving down the hallway, I passed a small bathroom on the right and a guest bedroom on the left. Both were empty. Then I reached the stairs to the 2nd floor. My gut tensed. There was something about that hallway leading up, something unnatural in the stillness. Step by step, I ascended. The upper floor had 3 doors, one slightly ajar at the end. I heard it then, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffle, like someone was dragging a foot across the carpet. My hand instinctively went to my sidearm, and my other held the flashlight steady. "Police department," I said, louder this time. "Show yourself, now." No response. I crept forward, each step measured, ears straining to catch the slightest sound. The door at the end of the hall was slightly open. I nudged it wider with my foot. Inside was a bedroom. The bed was unmade, sheets hanging halfway to the floor. A nightstand lamp lay tipped over on the floor, its cord trailing across the carpet. Something about the room felt wrong. I checked the closet. Empty. Under the bed. Empty. Window closed. Locked. Nothing. Then my flashlight caught it. A dark red smear near the bathroom door across the hall. My breath caught. I crouched and touched it with my gloved hand. Fresh blood. Not a lot, but enough to send a jolt through me. "Dispatch, we need immediate backup. Possible injury inside the house." Chris's footsteps echoed behind me. He was close, staying silent, ready for any movement. I swept the rest of the upstairs slowly. The 2nd bedroom looked like a kid's room. Small toys scattered across the floor, tiny chairs, posters on the walls. No one inside. The last door was the bathroom. That's where the blood trail seemed to lead. I reached for the handle. My flashlight caught something on the carpet just outside, another dark spot. I froze, heart racing. The blood led towards the shower, partially dried, but unmistakable. The shower curtain hung still. I yanked it aside. Empty. Nothing in the tub. The noise came next, soft creaking from below. My pulse quickened. Someone or something was moving in the 1st floor. I descended cautiously, keeping my flashlight aimed. Every step creaked under my weight. The living room and kitchen were still empty, but then I noticed a door near the refrigerator I hadn't seen before, slightly ajar. Not a pantry. Narrow stairs led down into a basement. The light switch didn't work. Complete darkness below. I radioed dispatch, letting them know I was entering the basement. The air grew colder as I descended. Concrete floors, exposed beams, boxes stacked haphazardly along the walls. And then, from the far corner, movement. Someone bolted behind a pile of boxes. I shouted for them to stop, hand on my weapon. They ran towards a small window near the ceiling. Glass shattered. I followed quickly, cutting my hand on the shards as I climbed out. Rain pelted me, soaking my uniform. The figures sprinted towards the alley at the end of the block. I chased as far as I could, but they disappeared into the darkness. When backup arrived, we secured the property. The homeowner wasn't there. Wallet and phone were left behind, signs of restraint upstairs, and blood matching the previous trail, but no suspect. That night haunted me. The man who called 911, the one forced to speak like a child, he survived, but the questions lingered. Who else was in that house? What had they been forced to endure? And why did the basement, the bedroom upstairs, feel like something unseen was watching us the entire time? Even now, driving past that street on patrol, I can't shake the feeling that someone or something still waits inside. The storm hadn't let up. Rain splattered across the pavement in relentless sheets as I stood outside the abandoned house, my uniform soaked through. Backup had finally arrived, but even with more officers on scene, the house seemed to thrum with a strange tension, as if it resented our intrusion. We moved in carefully, every step measured, flashlights sweeping over broken furniture and overturned boxes. The first floor had already been scoured, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I kept glancing at the stairwell leading down to the basement. That's where the last movement had come from, the hurried dash of someone or something that had escaped through the small side window. Chris stayed close, eyes scanning every shadow. "You sure this isn't some prank?" he whispered, but even he sounded uncertain. I shook my head. There was nothing prank-like about the blood, the restraints, or the strange alterations to the man's voice. I led the team upstairs. The hallway was dim, the overhead light flickering in protest. Bloodstains traced the path from the bathroom across the hallway floor. I stopped at the kids' room. Toys scattered everywhere. Dolls, tiny chairs, a small plastic tea set. It should have looked innocent. Instead, it felt menacing, like the room had been deliberately staged to confuse or terrify. Chris checked the closet. Empty. Under the bed. Nothing. I moved on. At the end of the hall, the bedroom that had initially unsettled me waited. Sheets tossed aside, a nightstand lamp fallen to the floor. My flashlight revealed small streaks of blood trailing to the doorway. "Clear," I called out quietly, keeping my tone even, but every muscle in my body was tense. I motioned for the other officers to fan out, searching carefully. No one emerged. The house seemed empty, yet every instinct screamed that we weren't alone. Descending back to the first floor, I approached the narrow basement door again. This time we were fully prepared. Flashlights and weapons ready, we moved down the creaking steps together. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the scent of mildew and something coppery beneath it. Boxes lined the walls in chaotic stacks. At first, nothing moved. Then from the far corner, a subtle shift, a shadow slipping behind a pile. "Freeze!" I shouted. The figure hesitated, then bolted toward the small basement window. Glass shattered as they forced their escape. I lunged for them, but only managed to see a dark silhouette disappear into the alley. Rain pummeled us from above as I followed briefly, but the figure vanished into the night. We regrouped and secured the house. Evidence of restraint was everywhere. Broken zip ties, signs of struggle, and blood matching the trail upstairs. But the homeowner was nowhere to be found. His wallet and phone had been left behind, abandoned in haste. It was only after we'd processed the scene that the truth of the 911 call came to light. The man we'd been searching for, the victim, had been held captive for years in that basement. His voice, altered to sound like a child, was the result of prolonged coercion by his captor. He had managed to call 911 through a brief moment of opportunity, leaving just enough trace for us to intervene. The homeowner, a man living alone, had created a private prison in his own home, hidden beneath the guise of neglect. Chris and I stayed late into the night, helping detectives document the house and secure evidence. It was the kind of scene that would haunt any officer, the mixture of everyday items and unimaginable cruelty. Dolls, children's toys, and neatly folded clothing arranged methodically in one room, while in the basement, a man had been held against his will. The contrast was grotesque, each detail more unsettling than the last. Even after the arrest, questions lingered. How long had the victim been held? What had been done to force his voice into that unnatural, childlike tone? How many times had he been forced to obey the rules of that basement, living in fear of every step on the creaking floor above? I couldn't imagine it. I didn't want to. Weeks later, the victim returned to his family. The relief in their eyes was unmistakable, but their questions mirrored mine. Months of uncertainty and fear had been replaced by shock and disbelief. And yet, even in freedom, the trauma lingered, a permanent shadow over every ordinary moment of life. I've driven past that street countless times since, the new family oblivious to the horrors that took place under their roof years ago. The children play in the yard, their laughter echoing in the calm of a normal neighborhood. But for me, the memory never fades. The way the blood led from room to room, the distorted voice that called for help, the feeling of being watched by something unseen, all of it remains etched in my mind. It's a reminder that terror often hides in the most mundane places, behind locked doors, beneath layers of normalcy. That night, I learned firsthand that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it lives quietly next door, waiting for the chance to strike, hidden in plain sight until it's nearly too late. Even now, when I'm alone at night, driving through quiet streets, I remember the creak of those basement steps, the faint shuffle of unseen movement, and the small pool of blood that led me straight to the truth. I know that scene will never leave me. The fear, the suspense, the helplessness of those moments, they linger, a permanent reminder of the darkness that can exist just beyond the surface of everyday life. No matter how long I patrol, no matter how many calls I respond to, that house remains in my memory. A house that looked abandoned, ordinary, unremarkable, but inside a nightmare had played out, and only by chance and vigilance did we intervene in time. And I know without a doubt that the victim owes his life to the momentary decision to call for help, the voice trembling, altered, and almost childlike, yet full of desperate hope. The memory stays with me, unrelenting. The shadows of that night still creep through my mind, a quiet reminder that sometimes the most normal neighborhoods hide the darkest secrets. It was late November, and the streets of Mapleton were already coated in frost. I'd been a canine handler for almost 9 years, partnered with a 4-year-old German Shepherd named Thor. He was steady, disciplined, and utterly reliable in high-stress situations. Warehouses, abandoned homes, dense woods at night. Thor had handled it all. Nothing usually fazed him. That's why what happened that evening still haunts me. We'd been called to assist patrol on a foot pursuit. The suspect had taken off a few blocks from where he'd been initially stopped, vanishing near a residential property. Neighbors reported hearing a struggle in the backyard, and the rear gate of the home was found open. Officers swept the first floor, but weren't confident the house was clear. By the time Thor and I arrived, roughly 20 minutes later, tension hung in the air like frost on a window pane. The house was 2 stories, tucked into a quiet subdivision. No forced entry from the front. The officers briefing me confirmed only the unlocked back door and the open side gate. "We didn't see signs of anyone upstairs," one of them said, "but we're not certain." I attached Thor to a short leash and issued the search command. He moved methodically through the first floor. Living room, kitchen, laundry, clear. We ascended to the second floor where a narrow hallway led to 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. No drafts, all windows closed. Empty as far as I could tell. The first bedroom was uneventful, as was the second. Thor then tugged toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. I scanned the room, clean, orderly. Nothing seemed amiss. But then Thor stiffened. His ears went forward, body rigid. Growls followed, low at first, escalating into sharp barks. He was staring down the hallway at something I couldn't yet see. Slowly, my eyes adjusted, and I caught it. A dark, tall figure standing near the last bedroom door, completely still and not responding to my announcements. "Who's there?" I asked. Silence. Thor pulled backward, refusing to approach. Every instinct screamed at me. This was wrong. The figure moved slowly, disappearing into the bedroom. I stepped forward, weapon ready, Thor tugging against me. The room was empty when I entered. Bed against the wall, dresser across from it, no closet secrets, no hidden panels. Thor refused to step inside. My backup began arriving and they saw it too, the way he refused, the tension radiating from his posture. Searching every inch yielded nothing. Still, Thor kept glancing toward that doorway, alert and uneasy. After 20 minutes, we left, Thor finally relaxing once we were outside. Even with years of experience, I replayed the moment countless times. Was it the suspect or something else? Thor never reacted like that before or since. I trusted him completely, but that night challenged even my trained instincts. Weeks later, another call drew me to Havenwood. The storm had rolled in, bringing a blackout that cloaked the streets in darkness. At 2 a.m., dispatch reported a 911 hang-up. The voice sounded like a young girl claiming to be held captive inside a home. My cruiser, parked in the middle of town, was ready. Backup was 10 minutes out. The house itself was run down, overgrown bushes blocking the windows, shingles missing from the roof. Signs of abandonment, but the call suggested otherwise. Chris, a fellow rookie officer, arrived just ahead of me. Together, we approached the front door. I rang, announced ourselves. A man, balding and overweight with thick glasses, peeked out. He claimed a pocket dial, but the toys scattered in the living room, a pink dollhouse I recognized instantly from my daughter's Christmas set off warning signals. He insisted he lived alone, yet the setup suggested otherwise. With telephonic approval from a magistrate, we entered. The smell hit instantly, rot and neglect. Living room cluttered with dishes and clothing, cockroaches scuttled through the chaos. I kept the man in sight, aware that anything could happen. Down the hallway, the first room held more toys, diapers scattered, a large doll posed in a rocking chair dressed in adult clothing, a methodical, chilling arrangement. Upstairs was worse. Every step deepened the sense that the house was hiding something. Finally, the basement door awaited. A creaking descent into darkness revealed concrete floors, exposed beams, and more boxes. From the corner, movement. Someone or something bolted for a small window near the ceiling, shattering glass. The figure escaped, slipping into the alley. Inside, evidence confirmed the horror. Restraints, blood, signs of prolonged captivity. The victim, a father of 3, missing for 2 years, had been held in that basement. The distorted, childlike voice on the 911 call had been forced upon him through coercion. That night, he managed to make contact long enough for us to intervene. The homeowner, his captor, was arrested, and the victim reunited with his family. Even after the arrest, questions lingered. How had the victim survived? What else had occurred in that house? I drive past the street now, watching new families settle in, oblivious to the past horrors. It's a stark reminder. Terror often lurks behind ordinary doors, hiding beneath layers of normalcy until fate or vigilance exposes it. The night after the basement incident, I couldn't shake the image of Thor frozen in the hallway, growling at nothing visible. I had handled countless high-risk falls, but this one felt different. There was a palpable sense that something beyond human awareness had been present that night. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. Even Thor, steady as ever, had reacted like he'd smelled something inherently wrong, something no canine is trained to detect. The following day, the department processed the homeowner's arrest. Evidence confirmed the captivity of the man we had found in the basement. Blood samples matched the victim's DNA, and the restraints indicated prolonged confinement. The psychological trauma alone was enough to explain the victim's distorted, childlike voice on the 911 call. But the oddities in the house, The precise arrangement of the doll in the rocking chair, the piles of adult clothing folded with obsessive order amid general chaos, remained unexplained. It hinted at a mind operating on ritualistic compulsions, yet nothing made rational sense. Weeks passed, but the memory of that house lingered. I started seeing patterns in the calls I responded to at night. Minor details that I had previously dismissed, slight distortions in sounds, shadows that didn't belong, even the behavior of Thor started to gain significance. I became hyper-aware of the ordinary suburban streets I patrolled. Any house with an unusual silence or clutter caught my attention. It wasn't paranoia, it was learned caution, reinforced by the last call. One evening, I was dispatched to a late-night domestic dispute on the outskirts of Mapleton. It was raining lightly, fog forming above the pavement. When I arrived, the residence looked normal, lights on, curtains drawn, but as soon as Thor and I approached, he froze at the edge of the driveway. His ears went forward, tail stiff, eyes locked on the front porch. My gut tightened. I had learned to trust these instincts. Inside, the situation initially seemed mundane. A couple arguing, no weapons, just raised voices and threats. But something about the tone of the female's voice set off alarms. She wasn't screaming in anger, it was panic, terror masked by volume. I called for backup, and as I approached, Thor barked sharply at the living room corner. Nothing visible, but the hairs along my neck bristled. The tension was similar to that house from November. I ordered everyone to stay calm, shining my flashlight around the room. A closet door was slightly ajar. As I approached, I noticed scratches along the frame, recent and deep. My pulse accelerated. I swung the door open, but it was empty. Thor remained tense, scanning the room in a pattern I could hardly follow. That instinctive alertness reminded me of the night in the hallway with the basement house. I realized these incidents shared an element beyond normal criminal behavior, a presence, a trace, something that unsettled even trained senses. The investigation following the basement rescue revealed more about the homeowner's history. He had moved frequently, never staying in one town for more than a year. No records of previous violent behavior, no arrests, yet neighbors occasionally mentioned unusual sounds or the smell of chemicals coming from his properties. The man we rescued described months of manipulation, forced labor, sensory deprivation, and psychological conditioning designed to break him. It was deliberate, calculated terror. He survived only because of a small mistake, his captor leaving a phone unattended for a moment. Months later, another call pulled me to a quiet cul-de-sac in Ridgewood. A neighbor reported faint screaming from an abandoned property, but this time Thor's reaction was immediate. He barked once sharply, then refused to move forward. His behavior was identical to that first hallway incident, frozen, tense, alert to a danger I couldn't see. My experience told me this wasn't a normal home intrusion. I radioed for backup while carefully advancing. Inside, the house was dark, cluttered, and seemingly empty. Every step echoed ominously. Thor's behavior escalated when we reached a narrow staircase leading to the basement. The faint smell of rot hit my nose, a mixture of decay and chemicals. At the bottom, Thor hesitated at a shadowed corner. I swept my flashlight towards it, catching a figure hunched behind old furniture. This person bolted towards a small window near the back. Just like the previous case, they escaped before I could reach them. This repeated pattern, victim restrained, house showing signs of obsessive organization amid chaos, escape through narrow windows or side yards, was now unmistakable. There was a method, a signature, a calculated way these individuals operated to avoid leaving obvious traces, and each time Thor's reactions were the only indicator that something beyond immediate observation was happening. One detail kept haunting me, the distorted voices. In the basement house, the victim's long-term captivity had forced him to adopt a childlike tone. In other calls, I noticed subtle variations in speech among victims, like the captors had conditioned them to communicate in abnormal ways to control their reality. It was psychological warfare on a level that left lasting scars, not just physical restraint. Thor's alertness and refusal to enter certain rooms became a crucial tool. I started relying on him not only for locating suspects or drugs, but for detecting these subtle presences, behavioral cues, and atmospheric anomalies that indicated human danger hidden beneath the mundane. He became a living early warning system, guiding me through situations where standard police training could not account for the invisible threat. The culmination of this pattern came on a stormy night in Briarwood. I was dispatched to a call about a missing teenager reported last seen near her home. Upon arrival, the street was eerily quiet, lights flickering due to the storm. Thor stiffened instantly as we approached the residence. The house appeared empty, but the teenager's room showed signs of recent activity. Clothes scattered, a chair tipped over, and faint marks on the floor suggesting a struggle. As I investigated, I heard faint noises from the basement. Thor growled low, refusing to descend. I paused, realizing the weight of the situation. Backup was en route, but I could feel the same tension I had felt years ago. The basement was dark, cluttered with boxes and storage items. From the shadows, movement. I called out, flashlight scanning, but the figure had vanished before I could fully identify them. Inside the house, evidence eventually confirmed the teenager had been held against her will for hours. Her captor had hidden her temporarily in the basement, moving quickly to avoid detection. My presence, combined with Thor's keen instincts, likely prevented a prolonged, more dangerous confinement. It was a testament to the partnership between handler and canine, trust and experience. After that night, I reflected on the pattern of danger hidden in the ordinary. Homes that seemed benign, neighborhoods that appeared quiet, people that seemed harmless, all capable of harboring horror beneath the surface. My years on night patrol, the countless hours of listening, observing, and tracking, culminated in understanding this. Some threats can't be predicted by logic alone. They require instinct, vigilance, and sometimes a partner like Thor to sense what cannot be seen. The lesson stayed with me. Even in the most normal-seeming neighborhoods, darkness can linger in corners where light barely reaches. It manifests in subtle details, behavioral cues, and the weight of a house's history. And for those trained to see it, the truth is chilling. Terror often hides in plain sight, waiting for the unprepared to stumble upon it. Now, whenever I patrol streets at night, Thor walks ahead, ears pricked, tail stiff. We're calm, methodical, and watchful, but I never forget that night in that basement. The fear, the unknown, the figure that didn't belong, those memories are embedded in my mind. They remind me that in our line of work, some dangers aren't just about criminals or suspects. Some are about the unexplainable, the hidden, the incomprehensible. And when you encounter them, the only thing you can do is trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust those who stand with you, even if they have 4 legs and fur.